I opened my eyes when someone cleared his throat in the doorway of the nursing home dining room. I remember the exact sound because it was too deliberate to belong there. Most people who entered that room came with soft shoes, lowered voices, and the careful expressions people wear when they are afraid of old age becoming contagious. This man walked in with polished brown shoes that clicked once against the tile floor before stopping beside my table. He looked at the name stitched onto my cardigan. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "Mr. Thomas Whitaker." I nodded. "Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. I've been trying to find you for almost 3 weeks." I frowned. "I don't believe we've met." "No." He hesitated. "But your late wife's attorney asked that someone find you if a very specific document was ever activated." Every conversation in the dining room seemed to disappear. The clinking forks. The television mounted in the corner. The nurse calling someone's name. All of it faded behind one sentence. "Your late wife's attorney." Emily had been gone for 4 years. People stopped mentioning her after the first year. Friends assumed talking about her would make me sad. They never understood. Not talking about her was what hurt. Daniel placed a slim leather folder on the table. "I think," he said quietly, "your wife expected something like this might happen." I stared at the folder without touching it. Then I whispered the only question that mattered. "What did she leave behind?" He looked around the room. "I'd rather explain somewhere private." I slowly pushed my chair back. My knees protested the movement. At 78, every motion required negotiation. But there are moments when the body remembers strength before pain. That was one of them. Because this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I always believed that houses remember people. Not ghosts. Not spirits. Just habits. The worn edge of a staircase where someone always stepped first. The kitchen window that caught the morning light because one person insisted breakfast should never be eaten in darkness. The porch swing that creaked exactly twice because my wife never sat down without gently pushing herself back first. Brick and wood absorb ordinary lives. That's why losing our house wasn't just losing property. It felt like someone had erased 43 years of conversations. My name is Thomas Whitaker. I'm 78 years old. Before retirement, I worked as a structural engineer for 39 years. Not the kind who appeared on television. Not famous. Just dependable. The bridges my team designed carried thousands of cars every morning. Office buildings we inspected still stand across 3 counties. During my career, I signed off on projects valued at more than $420 million. Most people never knew my name. That was fine. Engineers aren't remembered when they do their jobs correctly. Only when they fail. Emily used to laugh whenever I said that. She taught 4th grade for 32 years. Every Christmas, former students still mailed cards to our house. Some were doctors. Some electricians. One became a state senator. She remembered every single one. Even after retirement. Especially after retirement. She'd point at a family walking through the grocery store. That little girl with the red jacket, her father couldn't read above a 2nd grade level when he entered my classroom. Then she'd smile with the quiet satisfaction teachers carry. He reads to his daughter every night now. That was Emily. She measured success differently than I did. I counted completed buildings. She counted changed lives. Between us, we earned comfortable incomes. Never extravagant. Never enough to stop budgeting. Our combined annual income peaked around $148,000 during our final working years. We saved consistently. Contributed to retirement accounts. Paid every bill before the due date. Never carried credit card debt longer than a month. It wasn't exciting. It was steady. Steady built the house. People often assumed we hired contractors. We couldn't afford that. In 1987, we bought 1 acre of land for $41,500. Back then it sat outside city limits. Mostly empty fields. Everyone told us we were foolish. No one wants to live that far out. Today that same area is filled with schools, grocery stores, medical offices, and parks. Timing helped. But timing alone doesn't pour concrete. Every Saturday for nearly 20 months, I worked on that house. My brother Michael helped frame the garage. Emily's father installed kitchen cabinets. Friends came with sandwiches and tool belts. Emily painted every bedroom herself. Not because she had to. Because she wanted every wall to belong to us before furniture covered it. When the final inspection passed, I stood in the driveway holding her hand. She looked at the house for almost a full minute. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. "This isn't the biggest house. No, it isn't the nicest. No, but every corner knows our names." She was right. Our son Ryan was born 2 years later. I was 37. Emily was 35. He arrived on a rainy Thursday morning weighing 7 pounds, 11 ounces. I remember because I wrote everything down. Birthdays, school plays, little league statistics, first report cards. Parents think memories stay forever. They don't. Details disappear unless you protect them. Ryan was a bright child. Curious. Restless. Always asking why. When he was 8, he dismantled our toaster because he wanted to understand springs. When he was 12, he built a small wooden bookshelf using leftover lumber from my workshop. Emily cried when he presented it to her. Not because it was beautiful. Because one shelf leaned noticeably to the left. "You made this." He nodded proudly. "It isn't perfect." She hugged him anyway. Neither are people's. She kept that bookshelf in her classroom for 20 years. Looking back now, I search for signs. Parents always do. The moment things changed. The warning they should have noticed. Life isn't generous enough to provide clear turning points. Instead, changes arrive quietly. Ryan excelled in school. Graduated with honors. Earned a business degree. Started working in commercial real estate. By 38, he managed acquisition projects worth tens of millions. Successful. Confident. Sharp. People admired him. I admired him too. Perhaps more than I admitted aloud. Emily, however, noticed something earlier than I did. Not cruelty. Distance. One evening after Ryan left our house following Sunday dinner, she washed dishes silently for several minutes. Then she asked me something strange. "Did you notice?" "Notice what?" He only asked about the house. I laughed. "He works in real estate." "No." She shook her head. "He didn't ask how we're doing." I thought back. She was right. Ryan had asked about neighborhood property values. Whether we'd ever considered downsizing. If we'd refinanced. Whether we'd updated the deed after paying off the mortgage. Perfectly reasonable questions. Individually. Emily dried another plate. When someone begins seeing everything as an asset. She never finished the sentence. I wish she had. Because unfinished thoughts echo the longest. Ryan wasn't greedy in the way people usually imagine greed. He didn't chase expensive watches or sports cars. He drove a 3-year-old SUV until the lease expired. He wore tailored suits, but they weren't covered in designer logos. He rarely talked about money directly. What fascinated him wasn't spending money. It was control. He liked owning decisions. Owning schedules. Owning outcomes. By the time he turned 40, he could walk into a room of investors and convince them to spend $15 million on a commercial project, with nothing more than architectural drawings and projected numbers. That kind of confidence becomes a habit. Eventually, some people stop separating confidence from certainty. And certainty has a dangerous habit of convincing itself that everyone else simply doesn't understand. Emily saw that before I did. One Saturday afternoon, she stood beside me in the backyard, while I was trimming the maple tree we'd planted the year Ryan started kindergarten. It had grown almost 30 feet tall by then. She watched the branches fall into neat piles. "Do you know why trees survive storms?" she asked. I smiled. "I assume you're about to tell me." "They bend." I laughed. "That's your scientific explanation." "No." She looked up through the leaves. "It's their emotional explanation." I rolled my eyes, pretending to disagree. She nudged my shoulder. "You engineers always think strength means resisting. And teachers think everything has feelings." She smiled. "Only the important things." Then her expression softened. "I'm worried Ryan forgot how to bend." That conversation stayed with me for years. Not because I understood it then. Because I understood it later. There is a difference. Emily received her diagnosis on a Tuesday morning in late October. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist spoke calmly. Professionally. He explained treatment options. Clinical trials. Estimated timelines. Possible complications. I remember every word except the one that mattered most. Months. My mind refused to accept it. Emily accepted it before either of us reached the parking lot. She squeezed my hand. "We don't waste time pretending." I looked at her. "We're going to fight." She nodded. "We are." Then she smiled the same small smile I'd seen for 40 years. "But fighting isn't pretending." That was Emily. She could hold hope and reality in the same hand. The treatments lasted 11 months. Chemotherapy every other Thursday. 3 surgeries. 46 separate hospital appointments. I drove to every single one. Sometimes we talked during the drive. Sometimes we listened to old jazz records. Sometimes neither of us spoke. Silence between two people who love each other doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. Ryan visited. Not as often as he probably wishes he had now. His work kept him traveling. Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, Seattle. He always had meetings. Always had deadlines. Emily defended him every time. He's building a career. He has responsibilities. He loves us. She wasn't making excuses. She genuinely believed all 3 statements. On her final birthday, she asked for one thing. No restaurant. No party. No gifts. She wanted breakfast on the back porch. Just the 3 of us. I made pancakes. Burned the first batch. Ryan arrived 20 minutes late carrying flowers. Emily laughed. "You've been late since 2nd grade." He smiled. "I made it." "Yes." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You always do." Looking back, I wonder whether she already knew that would be the last meal we shared together. She watched us more than she ate. Parents do that. Even at the end. Especially at the end. Emily passed away on a quiet Sunday morning at 6:18. The hospice nurse looked at her watch. I didn't. Time stopped having meaning. The house changed immediately. Not gradually. Immediately. People say grief arrives in stages. Perhaps it does. But loneliness arrives all at once. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet because I couldn't move it. Her gardening gloves remained hanging beside the garage door. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand for almost 14 months. Friends encouraged me to put things away. They meant well. I couldn't. Removing her belongings felt too much like agreeing she wasn't coming home. Ryan helped with the funeral, handled paperwork, spoke beautifully during the service. He talked about his mother's kindness, her patience, her belief in second chances. Everyone cried, including me, including him. I never doubted those tears. Grief can be genuine even when people later make terrible choices. Life is complicated that way. For the first year after Emily's passing, Ryan called every Sunday evening. Sometimes for 30 minutes. Sometimes only 10. He'd ask whether I'd eaten, whether I'd seen my doctor, whether I needed anything from the grocery store. I appreciated it. Then the conversations slowly changed. Almost too slowly to notice. How's the roof holding up? When was the furnace replaced? Have you thought about hiring someone for the yard? You know, houses become a lot to manage. Reasonable questions. Every single one. Until you line them up. Then they become a pattern. I answered honestly. The roof has another 10 years. The furnace is fine. I enjoy mowing. I like living here. That last answer usually ended the conversation. Not immediately. But eventually. The first real disagreement happened 18 months after Emily died. Ryan visited on a Wednesday afternoon carrying takeout from my favorite barbecue place. We ate in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Emily had graded spelling tests for 3 decades. The same kitchen where Ryan had done algebra homework. The same kitchen we'd painted twice together. He set down his fork. Dad, yes, I've been thinking. That usually means I'm about to hear a proposal. He laughed politely. I found a wonderful retirement community. I'm retired. You know what I mean. I do. He slid a glossy brochure across the table. Photographs of smiling seniors. Walking paths. Fitness rooms. Community events. Weekly transportation. Everything looked clean. Organized. Efficient. I don't need this. You don't need it today. He leaned back. But eventually. There it is. What? Eventually. He sighed. I'm trying to plan ahead. I already planned ahead. You live alone. I've lived alone for 18 months. You could fall. I could. You could need help. I might. He rubbed his forehead. Dad, why are you making this difficult? I looked around the kitchen. Sunlight fell across the hardwood floor. Emily insisted we install instead of vinyl. The clock above the pantry still lost exactly 2 minutes every month. The windows overlooked the maple tree. Everything here carried a memory. I'm not making it difficult. I spoke quietly. I'm making it slow. What does that mean? It means decisions that affect the rest of my life don't need to be made this afternoon. He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. Fair enough. The conversation ended. But something about his expression stayed with me. Not anger. Calculation. As though he had simply crossed one strategy off a list and moved to the next. At the time, I dismissed the thought. A father looks for reasons to trust his son. Sometimes longer than he should. Autumn arrived early that year. The maple tree in the backyard turned bright red almost 2 weeks before the rest of the neighborhood. Emily always claimed that tree was impatient. It wants to be noticed first. Every October, she would rake the leaves into one enormous pile, even after Ryan was far too old to jump into it. Then she'd call him anyway. Come help. He would pretend to complain. I'm 25. I know. I'm an adult. I noticed. So why am I jumping into leaves? She would grin. Because I said please. 5 seconds later, He would be laughing in the middle of that pile like he was 8 years old again. Those memories refused to leave the yard. Sometimes I thought that was a blessing. Sometimes it felt like punishment. It depended on the day. After Emily died, I continued raking those leaves by myself. Not because the yard demanded it. Because rituals matter. People often underestimate rituals. They imagine they're habits. They're not. They're promises we make to people who are no longer here. Every Saturday morning I followed exactly the same routine. Wake at 6:15. Coffee by 6:30. Read 20 pages of whichever history book sat on my nightstand. Walk the property line. Check the fence. Sweep the porch. Water whatever flowers were still alive. Emily would have laughed at my precision. She always said I could schedule sunshine if someone handed me enough graph paper. Maybe she was right. Structure became my way of surviving silence. About 2 months after our conversation about the retirement community, Ryan started visiting more often. At first I appreciated it. Tuesday dinners, Saturday afternoon coffee, the occasional grocery run. He seemed attentive, patient, interested. If anyone had asked, I would have said our relationship was improving. Looking back, I can see something I couldn't see then. He was studying the house. Not obviously. Never with a measuring tape. But his eyes lingered. He'd pause near the electrical panel. Ask when the water heater had been replaced. Notice tiny cracks in the driveway. Take photographs to show a contractor. Once I found him standing in the garage, staring at the shelves I'd built 30 years earlier. "What are you looking at?" I asked. He smiled. "Just remembering." I believed him. Perhaps part of him was remembering. People can be sincere and strategic at the same time. Those truths often live together. Around Christmas, Ryan suggested organizing my paperwork. "Dad, you've got 40 years of documents. I know where everything is." "You know." He emphasized the word gently. "But would someone else?" I laughed. "I don't plan on disappearing." "No." He smiled. "But accidents happen." He wasn't wrong. So we spent an afternoon sorting filing cabinets. Insurance policies. Tax returns. Utility records. Old warranties for appliances that no longer existed. Emily had labeled everything in careful blue handwriting. One folder simply read, "House." Inside were building permits. Original blueprints. Mortgage statements dating back decades. Photographs taken during construction. Ryan flipped through them. "There you are." He pointed to a picture of me standing on roof trusses with a hammer in one hand. "I had hair." "You had a lot of hair." "I miss that man." "You miss his knees." "That's true." We laughed. It felt normal. Comfortable. Then he held up another paper. "The deed." I nodded. "Paid off years ago. You should probably keep this somewhere safer." "It's been safe for 30 years. He tapped the folder thoughtfully. "A bank box might be better." "I've never liked bank boxes." "Why?" "Because I prefer things I own to stay where I can see them." He didn't argue. He simply slid the document back into the folder. At the time, nothing about that exchange seemed important. Months later, I replayed it dozens of times. Every sentence, every pause, trying to understand whether that was the moment he realized exactly where everything was kept. Memory has an unfortunate habit. After betrayal, it turns ordinary conversations into evidence. Sometimes accurately, sometimes unfairly. I still don't know which parts belong to which. Spring brought heavy rain. The basement developed a small leak near the northwest corner. Nothing serious. just enough to dampen the concrete after storms. Ryan insisted on hiring someone. I'll pay for it. You don't need to. I want to. The contractor arrived 3 days later. Friendly. Professional. Estimated the repair at just under $2,800. Ryan paid before I even saw the invoice. I thanked him. He shrugged. It's easier if I handle these things. There was kindness in that gesture. Real kindness. That's W. The house felt different after they left. Not because anything inside had changed. The photograph still hung in the hallway. Emily's blue ceramic bowl still sat in the center of the dining table. The grandfather clock still ran 37 seconds fast, exactly as it had for nearly 12 years. Nothing physical had moved. Yet I could no longer look at a single room without wondering whether, somewhere on paper, it already belonged to someone else. That is one of the cruel things about betrayal. It changes places before it changes facts. I slept very little that night. At 4:12 in the morning I gave up trying. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, watched the sun rise over the fence I had built with my own hands. The grass shimmered with dew. A robin landed near the old vegetable garden Emily used to insist was just one tomato plant away from success. She was never particularly good at growing tomatoes. She blamed squirrels. I blamed the soil. The squirrels probably appreciated having two people argue over them for 20 years. For a few peaceful minutes, I let myself remember that instead of thinking about legal documents. Then the phone rang. Harold, you've been awake. How did you know? You answered before the second ring. I smiled despite everything. I suppose I did. Coffee. Second cup. Then tell me. I told him everything. Every document. Every explanation. Every sentence Ryan had spoken. When I finished, Harold remained quiet long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally he said, "Don't argue with him anymore." "I'm not planning to." "Good. Why?" "Because this stopped being a family disagreement the moment paperwork was filed." I looked out at the yard. "So what is it now?" "A legal question." He spoke with the calm certainty of a man who had spent 81 years learning the difference. And legal questions are answered with documents, not emotions. By 9 o'clock that morning I was sitting inside the county recorder's office. Government buildings have a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful. Administrative. People speak softly because everyone there is waiting for someone else to approve something. A young clerk with rectangular glasses greeted me politely. "How can I help you today, sir?" I slid the notice across the counter. "I believe there's been a mistake." She entered several numbers into her computer. Her expression remained neutral. Then she turned the monitor slightly toward herself and read for another minute. "I can print the public record." "I'd appreciate that." The printer hummed. She handed me 8 pages. Recorded deed. Transfer affidavit. Notary acknowledgement. Company registration references. Everything looked official. Painfully official. I reached the final page. There it was again. My name. My signature. The same slight angle on the W. The same careful imitation. Close enough to fool almost anyone. Not close enough to fool me. The clerk noticed me staring. "Sir, this signature isn't mine." She looked genuinely sympathetic. "If you believe there's fraud involved." She hesitated carefully. "You may want to speak with an attorney." "I think I will." As I gathered the papers, she added one sentence that stayed with me. "For what it's worth." I looked up. We see filing mistakes sometimes. Hope flickered for just a moment. Then she continued. "But forged deeds are much rarer." The word landed heavily. Forged. Until someone else says it aloud, your mind keeps searching for gentler explanations. Once she said it, those explanations disappeared. I drove directly to Harold's house. He was already waiting on the porch. 2 mugs of coffee. 1 empty chair. "You look terrible," he said. "I didn't sleep." "I can tell." I handed him the copies. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. Unlike me, Harold never rushed paperwork. Every page received the same attention. Every signature. Every date. Every stamp. After nearly 20 minutes, he placed the documents neatly back into the folder. "What do you think?" "I think someone expected you never to look." His answer surprised me. "Not that it's fake." "Oh, I think it's fake." He tapped the signature gently. "But that's almost secondary." "Secondary." He nodded. "Think about the psychology." I frowned. "If someone believes they'll be questioned." He leaned back. "They prepare explanations." He had explanations. "Exactly. If someone believes they'll never be questioned." Harold folded his hands. "They stop being careful." I stared at him. "You think he made a mistake?" "I think everyone makes one." He looked toward the street. "The question is whether we can find it." That afternoon, Harold insisted we visit someone I hadn't seen in almost 7 years. Margaret Lawson. She had worked as a paralegal for the law firm that handled Emily's parents' estate decades earlier. After retiring, she occasionally helped organize legal archives for several local attorneys. Meticulous, quiet, the sort of person who remembered filing dates from 20 years ago. She welcomed us warmly. "Thomas, it's been too long." "It has." She listened without interrupting. When we finished, she asked a question neither Harold nor I had considered. "Who handled Emily's estate?" I blinked. "David Mercer." She nodded slowly. "I remember David. He retired." "Yes." She walked toward a bookshelf. "I believe he transferred his client files before closing his practice." I frowned. "What does Emily's estate have to do with this?" Margaret looked directly at me. "Good attorneys occasionally prepare documents clients never expect to need." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." She smiled faintly. "Not yet." She reached for an old address book. "But I know exactly who inherited David Mercer's records." Harold and I exchanged a glance. Margaret wrote a name on a small piece of paper. "Daniel Reeves. Young attorney." She handed it to me. "Very thorough." I looked at the names. It meant nothing to me. "Not yet." Margaret continued. "If David left instructions connected to Emily's estate." She folded her hands. "Daniel would know." I slipped the paper carefully into my wallet. It felt strangely insignificant. Just a name. Just an address. Just another lead. I had no way of knowing that years earlier, while Emily was still healthy enough to laugh about impatient maple trees and burned pancakes, she had quietly asked one attorney a question that would eventually change everything. And somewhere inside a forgotten file cabinet, waiting for the right moment, was the answer she hoped would never be needed. The next morning, I called the number Margaret had written on the slip of paper. It rang 4 times. A young receptionist answered. "Reeves Legal Group, how may I help you?" "My name is Thomas Whittaker." There was a brief pause while she typed. "I'm trying to find Daniel Reeves." "One moment, Mr. Whittaker." Soft piano music filled the line. I almost hung up twice. Not because I was impatient. Because I had begun to expect disappointment. Every new phone call over the previous week had led to another question instead of another answer. Then a man's voice came on. "Mr. Whittaker." Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. I was told you might have inherited David Mercer's client files. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm afraid I can't discuss former client records without confirming a few details. I understand. He asked for my date of birth, the address of the property Emily and I had owned, the date of Emily's passing. When I answered the last question, his voice became noticeably quieter. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. I've located the file. Hope has a peculiar sound. Sometimes it's only 4 words. I've located the file. Daniel continued. There appears to be a sealed instruction attached to your wife's estate documents. A sealed instruction? Yes. It wasn't opened after her death. No. Why not? Because I heard papers turning. And it wasn't meant to be. I gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? I'm afraid I can't explain over the telephone. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? I honestly don't know. His answer sounded sincere. But I believe you should come see me. When? The sooner the better. His office occupied the 2nd floor of a renovated brick building downtown. Nothing extravagant. A brass directory in the lobby. Old wooden stairs polished smooth by decades of footsteps. The waiting room contained 6 chairs, a coffee machine, and shelves filled with law books that looked older than the receptionist. Daniel Reeves appeared younger than I expected. Perhaps 40. Neatly dressed. Calm. The sort of person who spoke only after deciding exactly what he intended to say. He shook my hand firmly. Mr. Whittaker. Please. I smiled faintly. After the week I've had, Thomas is fine. He returned the smile. Thomas. His office overlooked the courthouse across the street. I noticed that immediately. Funny what the mind chooses to observe when it's nervous. He placed a thick file on his desk. Across the tab in faded blue ink, someone had written, WHITAKR Estate. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. It was David Mercer's. I recognized it from documents Emily and I had signed years before. Daniel opened the file carefully. There are standard estate records. He turned several pages. Your wills. Another page. Property inventories. Another. And then. He stopped. A sealed envelope rested inside a transparent sleeve. Across the front, in Emily's unmistakable handwriting, were 8 words. Only if Thomas requests help regarding our home. I forgot to breathe. I knew every curve of her handwriting. Every letter. Every small habit. She always crossed the letter T slightly higher than most people. She dotted lowercase I-S with tiny circles instead of points. I reached toward the envelope, then stopped. I haven't seen her handwriting in years. Daniel nodded respectfully. I thought you might recognize it. I do. My voice sounded much older than I remembered. What is this? When David Mercer retired, he transferred all active and conditional files to our office. Daniel folded his hands. He also left very specific written instructions. What instructions? If you ever contacted us regarding ownership of your home. He looked directly at me. This envelope was to be opened in your presence. Silence settled over the room. Not uncomfortable. Heavy. Important. Daniel slid the envelope across the desk. It's addressed to both of us. My wife planned this. I don't know what she planned. He answered carefully. But she planned something. For several seconds, I simply stared at Emily's handwriting. 4 years disappeared. For just a moment she wasn't gone. She had simply left the room. Then I broke the seal. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a handwritten letter. The second appeared to be a notarized legal instruction. The third was a photocopy of another document entirely. Daniel gestured gently. You should read the letter first. I nodded. The first line blurred before I finished it. My dear Thomas. Emily had always started letters that way. Even anniversary cards. Even grocery lists left on the refrigerator somehow managed to sound affectionate. I swallowed hard and kept reading. She wrote that if I was opening the envelope, then something had happened involving the house. Not because she expected betrayal. Because she believed preparation was another form of love. She reminded me how many weekends we'd spent building it. How every window had been chosen together. How every room carried pieces of our lives. Then came the sentence that made me lower the page. If someone ever asks you to surrender your peace for the sake of convenience, remember that peace and convenience are not the same thing. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like her. Not dramatic. Not angry. Simply true. Daniel waited quietly. After another minute, I continued reading. The letter ended with one final request. Trust the documents David prepared. I insisted they exist even though I hoped they would never matter. I looked up. What documents? Daniel reached for the second page. It was titled, Affidavit of Intent Regarding Real Property. David Mercer had drafted it almost 6 years before Emily's death. The affidavit stated something surprisingly simple. Both Emily and I had instructed that any future transfer of the property required an in-person certification before the attorney of record, or his designated successor, if either spouse believed coercion, diminished capacity, or family pressure might ever become an issue. I frowned. I don't remember this. Daniel smiled slightly. Most clients don't. What do you mean? Mr. Mercer often prepared protective documents that people hoped would never be necessary. He tapped the affidavit. This wasn't recorded publicly. It wasn't. No, it remained in the estate file. I looked back down. So, Daniel finished the thought. If someone transferred the property without satisfying this condition. He paused. That becomes a very important legal question. For the first time in days, I felt something other than confusion. Not relief. Not victory. Just the faintest sense that the ground beneath my feet might not have disappeared after all. Emily had not predicted exactly what would happen. She had simply understood something I hadn't. Love should never rely solely on trust. Sometimes love quietly leaves behind proof. I read the affidavit 3 more times before I fully understood what it was saying. The language was formal. Dense. Filled with references to statutes and clauses that meant very little to me. Daniel noticed the expression on my face. Let me translate it into ordinary English. I'd appreciate that. He turned the document toward himself. Your wife didn't create a magical document that automatically prevents fraud. I didn't think she had. No, he smiled faintly. What she and Mr. Mercer created was a record. A record of what? A record that both of you specifically anticipated the possibility of pressure involving the house. I nodded slowly. And because of that concern, you both instructed that any future voluntary transfer should be personally confirmed before counsel. I frowned. So if someone ignored that, they ignored a documented safeguard. Does that invalidate the transfer? Daniel leaned back. I don't know. It wasn't the answer I wanted. But it changes the case. How? Fraud cases often depend on intent. He folded his hands. This affidavit suggests that if someone intentionally bypassed a known protection, a court may ask why. Why? Such a simple word. Such a dangerous one. For the first time since receiving the county notice, I felt like the story might contain more than my word against someone else's. There might be evidence. Not proof. Not yet. But evidence. Daniel picked up the third document from the envelope. This is what interested me the most. It was a photocopy of a letter David Mercer had written to himself. At least that's what it looked like. Dated 6 years earlier. Signed. Placed in the file. I occasionally did this myself, Daniel explained. When clients expressed unusual concerns, some attorneys documented the conversation. I looked down at the page. David had summarized a meeting with Emily. Not me. Emily. According to his notes, she had scheduled the appointment without telling me. Not because she wanted to hide anything. Because she knew I disliked discussing worst-case scenarios. That sounded exactly like her. She never protected herself. She protected me. The memorandum contained one sentence Daniel asked me to read aloud. Mrs. Whittaker stated that her husband trusts family more quickly than paperwork and requested reasonable legal mechanisms that would encourage future verification rather than blind acceptance. I stopped reading. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I laughed once. A quiet, almost embarrassed laugh. She knew me. Daniel smiled. I gathered that. Better than I knew myself. He didn't disagree. Before I left, Daniel asked an unexpected question. Thomas. Yes. Do you still have the original documents in your home? I believe so. I'd like to see them. Today. If possible. An hour later we stood together inside the study, where Emily had organized every file cabinet with colored tabs. Daniel examined everything carefully. Original deed. Construction permits. Mortgage release. Insurance records. He wore thin cotton gloves while handling the older papers. Not because they were valuable. Because they were fragile. Halfway through the second drawer he stopped. What is this? I leaned closer. A small cream-colored envelope. No labels. No stamp. Inside was a folded receipt. Then another. Then a notarized acknowledgement dated almost 20 years earlier. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. This shouldn't be here. What is it? He looked at me. A signature specimen. I don't understand. Your attorney apparently kept certified examples of your signature. I stared at the page. There it was. My signature. Repeated 6 different times. Witnessed. Dated. Notarized. Each one signed during unrelated transactions over several years. Daniel compared them quietly. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed a copy of the recorded transfer deed. He placed both pages side by side. The difference was obvious now. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. My natural signature flowed. The recorded one hesitated. Certain letters were copied instead of written. The rhythm was wrong. I couldn't have explained that to anyone a week earlier. Now I could see it instantly. Daniel nodded almost to himself. I was hoping for something like this. You think it helps, I think it gives a handwriting expert an authentic comparison. Hope grew slightly larger. Not because we had won anything. Because we finally possessed something solid. Truth often begins with tiny details. A curve in a letter. A pause in a pen stroke. The difference between copying and writing. Before leaving, Daniel walked slowly through the house. Not inspecting it. Observing it. He paused in the living room where photographs covered one wall. Emily holding Ryan as a toddler. Ryan wearing a high school graduation gown. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Ordinary moments. Daniel looked at one photograph of Emily standing beside the unfinished frame of the house, holding a hammer almost as large as her forearm. She looks proud. She was. You built this together. Nearly every inch. He nodded thoughtfully. I've handled property disputes before. I waited. They're usually about money. And this. He looked around the room once more. This doesn't feel like it's about money. No, I answered without hesitation. It never was. He turned back toward me. That's important. To the court. To you. He smiled gently. Courts decide ownership. His eyes moved once more across the family photographs. But understanding why something matters. He shook his head. That's a different question entirely. That evening I sat alone on the back porch with Emily's letter. I must have read it 10 times. Perhaps more. Each reading revealed something new. Not hidden clues. Just familiar wisdom I